Hey VC, it's Jim. I wanted to jump in on a bit of a thread that is going around. I think it was started by Black Beans and Rice, and James Griffiths picked up on it, and that's where I came into it and saw his video. The idea is show 10 records from concerts that you've been to, or artists from shows you've seen. And I loved the idea. It was incredibly difficult to get down to 10. So I think I started with something like 50 or 60 and kept having to whittle it down. But I just grabbed 10 that I thought were interesting or had something to them or some point with me, or were just a really good show. So I'm going to kind of go through these quickly. Technically, I'm showing 11, well, I'm talking about 11 concerts, but we're going to call the first one not really part of the 10. I just had to mention this one, and that is my very first concert was Captain and Tennille. My mother was a huge Captain and Tennille fan, and she took the family to see them at the county fair. This must have been 1975, 70, maybe 76, probably 1976. And it was great. I was a kid, and it was fun. The thing that I remember about the show, though, was we were at the fair before the show started, and we took a Ferris wheel ride, and we could see up over the fences that housed the arena where the show was when we got to the top of the Ferris wheel. And at the top, we could look down and see that one of the main lighting rigs, these huge concert lighting rigs, had fallen and crushed one of the pianos. The stage was a mess. I think the show was supposed to go on in maybe an hour or so. But it just looked like a complete disaster there. I couldn't believe what was happening. And then I don't even remember the show being delayed. They just got it together, and the show went on, and it was great, you know. Anyways, so that was the very first show that I went to as a kid. My second show was Kiss, but that's another story for another time. I'm not going to go into that one. So I'm going to jump into a show that I did and didn't see in about, I think it was 1990 in Baltimore. It was at Max's on Broadway. And this is Big Star, the third record. This is a repress from '87. I went to see Alex Chilton, and the opening band was Mazzy Star. Technically, I went to see Mazzy Star, and the closing band was Alex Chilton, because I had some vague interest in Big Star at that time. Alex Chilton was interesting to me. He had done some great stuff. I loved some of the songs from Big Star. I wasn't a huge Big Star fan, and I was a huge Paisley Underground fan. I was a big fan of Dream Syndicate and Rain Parade, and huge Opal fan. And so I knew about Mazzy Star before they were Mazzy Star, because for a couple of years after Dave Roback and Kendra Smith, who had Opal, Kendra Smith left. Hope Sandoval came into Mazzy, or to Opal, and then they changed the name to Mazzy Star and did new stuff, and that's what produced this first record from Mazzy Star. Anyways, so we went to see Mazzy Star at Max's, and we got there a little early, and it's a bar, and my buddy at the time went up to get some drinks, and Dave Roback was there at the bar drinking, and I think Tony started chatting with him. And while he was there, I guess Hope came up and said, I've been on the bus all day and I don't feel like playing. And so they didn't play. And to this day, I'm pissed off at them. As my wife would say, do your fucking job. It was just like, it was so unprofessional and so uncool for a band to be on a bill and for them not to play just because you're tired. That was just so uncool. And I was such a big fan of the music. So I didn't see them then. And, you know, still listened to the records, didn't hold a grudge against them for the music, but I just thought that was not cool. And then I ended up seeing Mazzy Star maybe 5 years ago or so, 4 or 5 years ago. They came here locally and played a really good show. But I will say that Hope was just the diva that you think she would be. I remember she had the venue turn the house lights down, and she kept complaining that they turned the house lights off. They turned all the lights off. There were no lights on. There was basically the emergency exit signs, and that was about it. And she kept complaining about there being too much light or the crowd making noise. After a while, it was just funny to me, like how, I suppose, disconnected and disrespectful that she was to the audience. It just seemed like she's in her own world. In a way, it just adds to the music. I don't know why, it just kind of does. But maybe it's sort of a sub-dom thing or something. I don't know. She was just, you know, I just kind of thought it was fun after a while. Anyways, that's my Mazzy Star story. The next one is, well, I'm going to show Calvin Johnson because this I think is the only record that I have yet replaced for Calvin Johnson, Beat Happening, Hive Dwellers, etc. So Calvin Johnson started K Records up in Washington and has gone through several different bands, Beat Happening being the sort of, I guess, most familiar to most people. And then he has a band called the Hive Dwellers, records things as Calvin Johnson, Dub Narcotic Sound System. So there's a lot of different, he's involved in a lot of different projects. But he came through town and did a show as the Hive Dwellers. And I had seen them back in the day in late 80s, early 90s, somewhere around there as Beat Happening. It was a great show. But when he came through as the Hive Dwellers, it was in a tiny little club here in Santa Rosa. And it's, you know, when I say stage, it's more like a, you know, foot tall riser. And it's just basically a room, probably 30 by 30 room, something like that. And the band was, let's see, the drums were unmiked and the guitar might have had an amp, but it was played very low. And Calvin sang unmiked. And to see a sort of rock concert structured that way it just completely threw me. It was such a different experience because he would sing without a microphone in front of him. And in that moment, it made me realize how much of a separation a microphone puts between a singer and an audience. It's like a wall between who they are and who you are. It kind of defines that separation. Whether they're holding it in their hand or it's on a mic stand, it really kind of defines this whole different experience that seems other. It doesn't seem like they're just you over there. It seems like they're kind of unapproachable because they're being amplified and pushed out through this electronic equipment. But it really felt like this incredibly intense, intimate, close experience because, you know, he'd be singing right literally in your face. I mean, within, you know, a foot of your face, he'd just be walking around singing right up to people. And it just really kind of shocked me. I've seen acoustic shows, you know, and you'd think, in a lot of ways, you'd think like, oh, a coffee shop show is, you know, like it's just somebody's, you know, performing without any kind of electronic equipment. This was somehow different. This was like a band that was just not disconnected from you. And he has this incredible baritone voice. He has this incredible presence. He's like this quirky kind of I don't know, there's like no irony to him. It's really kind of amazing to see him. And it was a phenomenal show. So if you ever get a chance to see Calvin Johnson, the Hive Dwellers, I don't think Beat Happening is coming back, but you know, that would be great. If you get to see any of those, don't miss that opportunity. It's really amazing. Next is Dead Man's Bones, which was a kind of strange little project from Ryan Gosling, the actor, and Zach Shields, that is, I don't know how you describe Dead Man's Bones. In a way, it's sort of, it seems like it should be a novelty project. It sounds very much like sort of Halloween music, and really kind of played with that aesthetic, and it's kind of spooky and dreamy. And it seems like it should be kind of a joke, but it's really a great record. It's a good pop record. It's a good kind of I might even call it dream pop. It's just this strange little thing that was made. And he toured the band. This was 2009, I believe. Came to Bimbo's in San Francisco. And it was just a great show. I mean, really, really great show. It's a little club in the city. And Gosling wasn't huge yet. He had I think he had success with like The Notebook. I think he was in that or something. He was in something that people knew who he was. And so there were a lot of young women who were screaming at the stage at different points. They were pretty much under control, but it was a little funny, and I think Ryan Gosling handled it really well. I remember him really being kind of very generous and gentle in his in his return heckles. But the show was great. It had this crazy, weird talent show beforehand. All these kind of odd, kind of spooky themed acts. There was a couple of people dressed up as ghosts in sheets. I remember there was a Bride of Frankenstein kind of dressed up woman who played the accordion, if I remember right. And a lot of this record has children's choir accompanying the music. And they brought in a local children's choir, which I believe that they did on, like, they had a small tour, and I believe that they arranged for that pretty much on at every show, or tried to. And they would have a local children's choir come in and accompany them, and they did an amazing job. It was really just a great show. My guess is that's a project that won't get resurrected, and you won't have a chance to see them again, but it was a great show to have been to. Next is Ezra Furman, who does shows, usually records with a band, but has done a few shows here in town as a solo act, so just Ezra and his guitar. Really, really just powerful singer-songwriter performances, great music. I think Ezra lives in Oakland, is my understanding, so I think that's why every once in a while he shows up here. So we get the benefit of that. If you get the chance to see Ezra Furman with or without his band, do it. Great show. Really, really just great music.
And I watch you with your purse from the adjacent coffee table at the Starbucks they built inside my heart. When your makeup starts to run, you can see you're getting older. You can see your life has been hard. Your face is worn like an old playing card. The Queen of Hearts. The Queen of Hearts.
Next is Gang of Four. So I didn't get a chance to see Gang of Four in the original lineup, the original band. I had a friend who actually was toured with them doing lighting back in, I think, '83. It was when the bassist quit. I've forgotten her name, but the woman who played bass in the early '80s, she quit and left the tour, and I think he ended up playing bass for them on a few shows. Thane. It's been a long time since I've thought about Thane. Anyways, I didn't get to see them back then, but earlier this year, Gang of Four came to town, or came to San Francisco. Really, Gang of Four that's touring as the name Gang of Four right now is Andy Gill, the guitarist. And then there's 3 other people that are new members. So for me, I knew I wasn't seeing Gang of Four, I was seeing Andy Gill and a really good cover band is how I approached it. I didn't want to think, oh, I'm seeing Gang of Four. It's okay for bands to continue on by replacing a member, but when there's only one original member left, I think it's quite a stretch to call it the same name. Went to the show. It was really a great show. It had a great time. I love Gill's guitar playing. Just absolutely love it, and have from day one. From the moment that I heard Anthrax, I was in love with his guitar playing. And so I was thrilled to have seen him at least. And the guys, he's got like 3 other guys, they're young, really good show. The music was great. You just have to take it for what it was. And then I just had this wonderful little thing where I ended up at the end of the show, I went out to buy a t-shirt. Well, I should back up a little bit. So when they play Anthrax, they absolutely destroy. The first song, they open with it, and they absolutely destroy the guitar. So just crush the guitar when they're playing that song. And I was thinking, oh, well, that's got to be a thing where every night you come out and the first thing you do is you just smash a guitar. that can't be an easy thing to do every night. And then after the show, I went out to buy a t-shirt, and it turns out the broken guitar was sitting there, and they were selling it with the merchandise. And it wasn't very much money. And I thought, if I'm going to come away with a concert, memento, it might as well be that. So I have Andy Gill's guitar from that show, which I think is just awesome. I'm a huge Gang of Four fan. So next is a show that I saw in 1988 in San Francisco. It was Miles Davis, and I am not a big jazz guy. I appreciate jazz, but I don't really have a strong depth of knowledge in jazz. And so a friend of mine, who's probably not too dissimilar from me in how we think about jazz, bought me a ticket, and we went to see him. And to this day, it's something I'm incredibly thankful for him to have done. It was an amazing show. Saw him at the War Memorial Opera House, and I just remember him coming out in these big kind of gold lame kind of genie pants and slippers. I remember Sheila E. was playing percussion. I think Wynton Marsalis was playing as well. I can't remember all who was there. But it was a really amazing show. Just great. I'm lucky to have seen that show. And there are probably a lot of people in the vinyl community who would have appreciated it even more and are either too young to have seen him or never had the chance. So I am very thankful that I had that chance. Next is Morphine. Morphine was definitely one of my favorite bands in the 90s. I was a huge Morphine fan. Earlier this year, I came across this record, and it says, Morphine, live at the Warfield, 1997. And I looked at the cover and I went, I was at that show. So it's really cool to have a recording of a show that I was at. So this is the Warfield in San Francisco in 1997. And I believe they played 2 nights at the Warfield, and this is the second night, which is the night that I was at. And it was a great show. And it was really tragic. Mark Sandman died, I think a couple years later, like 2 years later. What's to say? I mean, you won't be able to see them again, but I'm glad to have seen them. Really glad. Next, My Bloody Valentine. This is a recording of a show from Vancouver, Canada this is July of 1992. This is right about the same time that I saw them in Baltimore. At, oh God, what was the name of that club? Like Hammer something, like Hammer Jacks or something like that. It's been a very long time. Anyways, I saw them again in 2008, I think, and in San Francisco. Both shows, amazing, incredibly loud. I knew enough to wear hearing protection the second time, but not the first time. I never wore hearing protection when I was younger, and I think I've lost some range in my hearing. Probably mostly thanks to a ministry show that I went to that my ears rang for 3 days afterwards, but this one certainly didn't help. They're an experience live that, they still tour now, and it's the original band. You should definitely go see them. I'd say that they're probably only better than they were back then. Worth seeing. One of my favorite bands. Next is, I'll just start with this, Sonic Youth. This is a box set of Daydream Nation. I saw Sonic Youth quite a few times in the 80s, and I think the last time that I saw them, if I'm remembering right, the last time that I saw them was the show that I'm going to talk about, which was 1990 in San Francisco at the Warfield, which seemed to me like a really big place to see Sonic Youth. I hadn't seen him in a place that big before. It's not a big place. It's a pretty small venue. It's probably 1,000 people, maybe 1,500 people. It's probably max capacity, but not a huge place. But it seemed like a massive venue at the time for me to see Sonic Youth in. And there was this other band playing that I actually didn't know at the time, and that was this band, Nirvana. They opened up for Sonic Youth at that show, and Nevermind hadn't come out yet, so they had just Bleach was out, and they were great. They were just a phenomenal opening act. It was really a good show, and that was the only time I had a chance to see them, because by the next year, Nevermind had come out, and they were massive, and I wasn't really a fan of going to big concerts, so that was my chance to see them, and I saw them and was very happy about it. The last concert I want to talk about is 1987 at a little club near here where I live. It was called the Katati Cabaret. Probably my favorite concert venue ever. Just because I saw so many great bands there, and it was just a tiny little club in a tiny little town. And somehow they got all of these great bands there. And the Chili Peppers, 87, they only had their first 2 records out. The first record, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and then Freaky Styley. Those 2 were out. Uplift Mofo, Party Plan hadn't come out yet. That was, I think, a few months later. Yeah, I think it was the end of the year when that came out, of 87. And so they were the kind of crazy punk funk band that, if you know their first couple albums, that's who they were at the time. And so they came to town, and we went to see them. And what I remember most about the show is that they came out. So we're standing, it's a tiny little hall. It's probably 30 feet wide, 50 feet long. So we're all standing around kind of loosely in the crowd, because I'm not even sure it was sold out. And the dressing room is actually at the back of the venue. And the bands usually just come out and they walk around the edge of the hall and up to the front and get on the stage. And I remember standing there, and then all of a sudden, Anthony Kiedis and Flea bump into me and push past me, and they're completely naked, and they've got these little doilies, little paper doilies, holding them over their junk with a hole stuck through them, and their dicks sticking out through the doily, and they're walking through the crowd offering people hors d'oeuvres. And that's how they got up to the stage. And that was it. And I think by the time they got up on stage, I think they had put socks on over their junk. And they played that way. I'm thinking they played that way for the whole show, if I remember right. I don't remember them putting clothes on. But yeah, that was the Chili Peppers. Great show. Yeah, and that was the original lineup. So that was Kiedis and Flea and Hillel Slovak and Jack Irons. So there was a window there. So early on, Irons was the drummer, and then there was a window where he had left, and then they had problems with the replacement drummer, and he came back, and this was before Hillel OD'd. So it was just this perfect little window to see the Chili Peppers, the original lineup, which is still my favorite lineup. This record is the only Chili Peppers record that I've replaced because I just came across it recently, and the records from the early '90s with the new lineup were good. They were well made. I like Blood Sugar, Sex Magic, and Mother's Milk. I think those are two really good records. But to me, the first three records are the Chili Peppers to me. Anyways, so those are my shows that I wanted to talk about, and I hope you enjoyed that. This is probably really long, but yeah, I'd love to hear about other shows. I'd love to hear about other people's shows and records associated with them. So, thanks.